Hey there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter Podcast. The Savvy Painter Podcast is published every other week. If you are a painter who is looking for down-to-earth, real-life conversations about art, how to create it, and how to sell it, you are in the right place. Savvy Painter has been downloaded over 1.5 million times by artists in 150 countries. This is the place where you will find your community. You'll be inspired to create, and you'll hear real stories from artists who are thriving with their art. So if you are new to this podcast, I want to welcome you to the Savvy Painter community, but make sure that you don't miss an episode. Sign up for weekly updates, free guides, and workshop announcements. Just go to savvypainter.com/subscribe. It's that easy. My guest this week is the artist Diana Corvelle. Diana paints stunning and intimate gouache portraits of women who have been subjected to sexual harassment. She began the series after the activist Tarana Burke began the Me Too movement in 2015. At first, Diana thought she would just talk to women in her direct social sphere. She limited it to her friends and immediate family and asked if they had ever been subjected to sexual harassment. They had. So Diana began painting portraits of these women and telling their stories. But to protect their identities, she painted the portraits based on the historical tradition of the lover's eyes. If you've never heard of the lover's eyes, I hadn't either. Lover's eyes became popular in the late 1700s. They were small paintings of just a person's eye, and they were worn as brooches. But to know who the portrait was, you had to know them pretty well. Diana expanded on this idea by bordering her portraits with intricately cut paper that recalls doilies or Victorian-era Valentine's Day cards. In this episode, Diana and I talk about the evolution of her project and where she's taking it next. She also gives us a glimpse into what goes on in her studio. There is a lot of serious work happening in there, but there's also equal parts of humor and a little bit of Bob Ross to balance it out. Yes, Bob Ross. Here is a delightful conversation with the artist Diana Corvelle. Diana, welcome to the Savvy Painter Podcast. I am super excited to talk to you.
I am so delighted to be here. Beyond delighted. Thank you for having me.
Tell me about when you started painting sort of professionally. What made you... Can you define a moment? Here's a different way to ask the question that I always ask. Like when you decided that you were going to do this for real, that this was no joke, it's not a hobby, you're all in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty lucky that I had an upbringing where my interest was nurtured right off the bat. So my grandma was an artist, my family was really supportive, and I always knew, and I fall in the category of artists who always knew, right? I feel like there's two categories, like the ones who are like, as soon as I can hold a pencil, I know what I'm going to do. I'm in that category. And I think everyone in the other category of coming later to it or deciding whenever moment later, I think that it has to do with upbringing and folks that are supportive and how their family honestly feels about art as a profession. So my family had artists in the family, felt pretty good about it. So I just kind of came to it naturally because I was allowed to, basically. Yeah.
Because you were encouraged, and it was something that didn't feel like scary to your family to be like, oh, okay, Diana's going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really tell me that it would be something maybe financially undesirable, anything like that. It was a follow your dream kind of situation, and my family was super supportive of me. And so even though we didn't have a lot of money or anything, my grandma taught art. My other grandma went to garage sales all the time. So I just always had access to materials or gently used materials. And I wasn't picky about what I drew on. And so my artistic grandma would take me to museums, and so I was growing up knowing a lot about like the Golden Age illustrators, Arthur Rackham, and like Maxfield Parrish and N.C. Wyeth. And I knew those names from a young girlhood. And since she was also taking me to museums, I knew hyper-realist artists like Chuck Close back in the day or Dwayne Hansen. And I was kind of floored. I know Chuck Close is kind of problematic now with all of the Me Too stuff, but I was just floored by just the raw talent. And so I was seeing my grandmother's realistic figurative work growing up. I was surrounded by that. And then I was just allowed to enjoy art and pursue art. And no one really told me to change course. So I just kind of always took it seriously. So even when I was small, my grandma would say, "You're going to go to RISD." So I was like an 8-year-old being told, "You're going to go to RISD." And I mean, gosh darn if I didn't, but I mean, like it was baked in. I came that way. I was allowed to remain that way. And I was grateful. In hindsight, I know that having a family that let me do that is not all the families. And that upbringing, that supportive upbringing on the arts was super helpful.
That's so cool. I love it. I love that your grandmother at 8 years old told you were going to RISD.
That is some hot nonsense. I didn't even question it. I was like, well, that's where I'm going.
You're like,
I would just go around.
RISD. Okay.
I was like, all right, let's just go there. Yeah. It was funny.
Oh, that's great. For people who've never seen your work, how would you describe it?
Back to my inspirations, right? We have those hyper-realist artists like the Chuck Closes of the world. And then we have the more graphic design or illustrative artists like the Golden Age illustrators. And so I think my work is really born from those two things. So I work in gouache. So typically I do works on paper and I use gouache. I use gouache akin to how most artists would use, say, like an egg tempera. So I use the gouache and I layer it with these transparent, kind of tiny little brush strokes, these little tiny cross hatches of color, and I build up this nuanced color. And so the portraits that I'm doing, and they're generally portraiture, are fairly detailed and realistic, but then I leave the expanse of the white paper in the background and kind of indulge my love of design and gilding the lily by cutting into the paper. So it's a fusion of cut paper and realist gouache paintings together. So I'm able to kind of combine those two things of the realism and the design. Since I also, like you, studied illustration at RISD and wanted to be a children's book illustrator at first. So very common story. So yeah, all of the people who knew how to draw were in the illustration department. And so I never stopped loving design, but I also really wanted to pursue realism. So now I've just kind of fallen into making these works on paper where I can be really just a little extra, you know what I mean, with the detail and the ornate textures that I'm creating with the paper, but it's not so visually overwhelming because it's a lot of breathing space around the portrait with the weight of the page.
Yeah. I'm curious, what were some of your takeaways from school that you brought into your artwork? And then also, what are some of the things that you kind of actively choose to leave behind?
I mean, I think what I was really trying to do when I was studying illustration was improve my craft. You know, compositionally, it was all in there. I was happy to learn those kinds of design elements. But I think I was really just trying to get better at drawing, trying to get better at painting. One of the things that I remember them telling me at RISD over and over again was like, kind of pick a lane, girl. You know what I mean? They would have me, I would be bouncing all over using different media, and they wanted me to stick to one and be consistent, and I didn't want to be penned down. And so I feel like even though my finished bodies of work that, you know, I put on my website and all are all gouache, I don't leave those other mediums alone. So I feel like I do ignore them in a certain degree where they're saying, focus on one, specialize on one. And I'm saying, you know, I love oil pastels and I love watercolor and I love graphite, and I'm not giving those things up for love or money. So I feel like I learned drawing from life just by doing it so often. I had a wonderful crayon teacher, and I felt like that was pretty impactful, Tony Janello. And something about layering the colors with the crayons. And I know a lot of devotees of this teacher because I think he really had an outsized impact on all of those of us who he did reach. I really loved his class for that reason. So I was trying to talk my painting teachers into letting me use crayons for final projects, and something about layering it with a medium that stayed where you put it, unlike oil paint, was a breakthrough for me. Just technically, I was able to think about color a little bit more in a way that's natural to how I like using it. I don't know if that answers your question.
It gives a good insight, though. Yeah, it does answer the question, and it gives a good insight. Somebody gave me, probably my mom gave me like a little pack of oil pastels when I was a kid. But I think I loved drawing. Arthur Rackham, same thing. I have him and of course N.C. Wyeth and all of those artists. Even as a kid, I would buy books only because, or I would get them for Christmas every year only because Arthur Rackham illustrated them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So for those oil pastels, I never really got into them because I think I just was like so into the pen and ink like Arthur Rackham did, or I wanted to paint, with like be a grown-up artist.
I think I just still work with crayons. And I mean, I did a copyist program at the Met. Everyone else is bringing oil paint like grown-up artists. And I'm in there with my oil pastels surrounded by children who are like, hey, I have those at home. Look what she's doing with that. That looks fun. I should get me one of these giant easels, making master copies of Ray Dawn and Klimt and I love oil pastels. I love it.
Okay, so dumb question, but I know other people are going to be are thinking this too, because somebody in one of my classes was asking another student about this. What do you do with them?
What do I do with what?
With oil pastels. So you're drawing with a crayon. So you're drawing with them and you're layering the colors on. But do you mix mediums in with them too, or is it just?
You can. I mean, it has an oil base, so you can mix. And that was the case with the crayons too. If you didn't get the water soluble crayons, if you got the oil based crayons, you could use turpentine on it if you had a prime surface. But I'm pretty turpentine shy. It's really smelly. And so I have a rough time with it. I'll do it, but it's smelly for me. So I just will smear it physically with my fingers to get that base layer down. And then I'm letting a lot of the optical blending take place. And again, I think because oil pastels don't let me use detail and I'm a detail freak, it made my colors so much better. And so now, I teach oil pastel class now. I kind of coerced Sadie Valeri into having an offering at her atelier. And so I'm just ending that cycle this week. But yeah, it's amazing. They photograph so beautifully. All of the students are doing such a great job. And because most students are looking at detail, and it's so tough to get everyone to see the forest for the trees. And oil pastel is basically like, you don't get a tree, you just have to take the forest. And so I love it for that reason. And it really helped my color sense, just wonderfully. So I loved having my mind be taken away from where just focusing on detail and really looking and seeing just color for color's sake. And it's a very fast medium. So I can really get a lot of immediacy out of plein air drawing or anything like that. So I bring it with me everywhere. Yeah.
I'm going to have to go back and get some new ones. I think I probably still somewhere in a box have that same thing.
You should. And so my advice to you, if you do pick them up, is invest in some neutral colors, because a lot of those limited palettes are just brutal if you're trying to get anything neutral. Otherwise, it's just too high chroma and you're just sitting there like, hey, I wish I had a light gray.
Okay.
You don't want to have to mix black and white every time. Be kind to yourself. So yeah. Good
advice. Okay. That sounds like it'll be fun to play with. And I guess a similar question, gouache. I love gouache so much, but there's so few artists who use that sort of as a sole medium. At least maybe I haven't done a good job of seeking out the gouache artists, but so far it's you and Phyllis Schaefer.
And actually, what Kay Ruane would do, she is another artist living in California, and she's been doing mostly graphite now, but she used to have gouache plus graphite in her work, and she's a realist artist, and it was beautiful. I covet her work. It's really stunning. But yeah, I liked how she used it kind of strategically, not the whole piece.
What made you decide to go with gouache as your main?
Okay, I can really then say, they make you use gouache in college for 2D design. And I was one of no other people but me who really liked it. Everyone else, I think, was a frustrated oil painter and was just looking at this fast drying water soluble medium. What is this? But I just took to it like a fish to water. It seemed to behave the way I wanted it to, in a way that I just always liked. So since those 2D design classes, I just was like, yeah, I should use this. This is fun. So I did other projects with it after school on graduating, and I was like, this is
just pretty cool stuff. Yeah. We had to do so many of those design projects too. And I think that, I'm not sure how it was at RISD, but at Art Center, it was like, you had to be able to paint great. So you had to do the color scales. And then you also had to do these geometric patterns that fit a certain, they were basically trying to get us to A, be incredibly good at craftsmanship, and B, be incredibly good at grayscales and color values, et cetera, et cetera. But part of the craftsmanship is like, we had to paint these little squares and you had to do like a whole grays, like a 10-step grayscale, and you couldn't, no streaks.
Yeah. The irony of that is not lost on me. The fact that it is gouache at its best is used to create flat planes of consistent color. And here I am using these tiny little, I'm using like a 20/0 brush, like little eyelash size brush. I'm very, very happy with my tiny brushes and like doing these little tiny lines of overlapping. I'm doing the opposite of what it was billed for, at least, which is like having these really clean, flat planes of color. And I'm like, let's make it look volumetric. Let's do this. Okay. The opposite of what they said to do. I'll go ahead and try that one.
So you got a little bit of the rebel streak in you. I like it.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know.
The thing that amazes, so it took me the longest time to figure out that you could actually do something with gouache other than make perfect flat flames of color. And once I realized that, I was like, this is fun. Like, oh my gosh, this is so fun because it's sick. But I love the smell of gouache. Like, as soon as I smell that, I'm like,
the smell does not bother me. I can use water. Living my best life, I'm going and transitioning to egg tempera because I want to make some more archival things, and certain, like art competitions, they won't let you submit works on paper, all of that good stuff. So I want to test the waters on that. But right now, it'll be my next project. I'll get to it. I'm going to get to it. Yeah. A friend gave me all of her pigment and all. So I have a setup ready to rumble as soon as I'm slightly less lazy.
I love it. So tell me about the content of your work. What is it that inspires you and gets you like all fired up to paint?
People and their stories I love. And so I do mostly portraits for my finished gouache pieces. And then, chasing likeness is always fun, and color is really beautiful. And I think as artists, we see beauty in literally every person. So I'm always just so happy to be painting or drawing whoever, and it doesn't have to be a supermodel. I see beauty in every single face. So I love that. And so what I've been trying to do is a quasi-narrative portraiture where the cut paper elements that are more design focused and graphic kind of act as this symbolism, almost counterbalance to just a straight portrait. So I'll put in something to allude to a narrative that I'm thinking of with the portrait, with the cut paper. And it's only now in this new series that I'm getting very explicit with the narrative. So before I was kind of trying to see what would happen if I just left that interpretation up to the viewer. And now I'm really doubling down on saying this is what the narrative is, and I'm including text for the first time. So.
Oh, wow. What made you decide to include the text? That's different.
It's different, but I am now explicitly having the first person narrative of the portrait subject included in the piece. So I'm doing a series of eye portraits, and they're on cut paper. So they have the cut paper border around cushioning the eye, as it were. And each cut paper border has the first person experience of the woman, the subject, right? Her experience with gendered violence, sexism, harassment, pay discrimination. So I'm really using their own words to tell their own story and being incredibly explicit. And so I think the reason why I'm including text in this series is I mean, in part, I was just very inspired by all of the kind of grassroots activism surrounding a lot of the hashtags, right? The Yes All Women, the Me Too, that are just, or hashtag everyday sexism, things that were really cropping up. And I saw the raw power behind seeing those incredibly specific stories of these women and having the stories for the first time really be taken seriously. So I feel like I watched a cultural tipping point, and I wanted this work to be speaking to that, because essentially like the hashtag Yes All Women came about in like 2014 after the mass killing in California by the quote unquote incel. And so yeah, he killed a bunch of people, and involuntarily celibate is what incel means. I mean, it's in the news a bunch now, and it's really tragically just grotesque, a lot of their feelings about women. And so women saw this killing and started saying, you know what, yes, this guy was a monster and he's killing women because he feels like they owed him sex, essentially. But all of these more minor things happen to us every day. And they just started spontaneously sharing examples. And so the point of the hashtag was, yes, all women have this story. And so I kind of ruminated on that for a bit. And this was before Me Too really, I mean, it was after Tarana Burke's activism with the Me Too phrase and what that meant. But it was before Alyssa Milano had tweeted it out and it gained more popular following. Yeah, I said to myself, what would it look like if I kind of took a slice of my family, my friends, my coworkers, the women in my world, my direct social sphere, and asked them, tell me your story. Ostensibly, yes, all of them would have a story. And yeah, all of them did. Most of them had way more than one story. Not all of them elected to participate because privacy is a thing. But I did choose the format of just the eye portrait based on the historical tradition of lover's eyes, because you can't tell. Unless you know that woman very well, you can't tell who she is based on one feature. So this series is like a nexus of all of these things that I've been thinking about. And so the text portion of it, where I'm really not just pursuing the narratives that I am interested in my other portraiture, but I'm really doubling down on that and explicitly saying what it is. I'm having that be part of a set where I get to make incredibly specific portraiture that's also anonymous and shields the women that I'm painting. I get to still work with the decorative, right? All of the cut paper borders around this almost look like doilies. They're really decorative. They're intensely feminine and decorative looking, kind of hearkening back to women's crafts and paper valentines and things like that, and using that lover's eye format these things were exchanged as tokens of love and devotion. And so I think also it's my way of honoring these women who do mean a lot to me and who have lived through some really abhorrent things and are just putting one foot in front of the other no matter what. It's kind of a big project for me.
Yes.
Of lover's eyes, which, yeah.
I actually had not heard the term lover's eyes, but I mean, I totally get it when you explained it. I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Like if I saw somebody's eye that I'm in a sea of eyes, and if that's the only feature and I know that person intimately, I would recognize it immediately. But
not if you didn't. I mean, you can take the quiz with like famous people. I think they have it online, and it's pretty fun. You'll get a lot of them wrong, even if you know that person. And so it's a weird thing. Lover's eyes came into popularity like in the late 1700s and kind of lasted for several decades. And as lore has it, the Prince of Wales, the soon-to-be King George IV, had sent one to his mistress, his twice-divorced Catholic mistress that he was trying to marry. And clearly that didn't work out because of the times. And she reciprocated with an eye of her own. And so the legend has it that fashion was born. It was repopularized later by Queen Victoria, who commissioned a whole bunch. But when the Prince of Wales commissioned Richard Cosway, a really popular miniature artist at the time, and sparked that fad, or so legend has it. But there's precious little scholarship written on lover's eyes, and there's only about I don't know, 1,000 in existence. So as soon as I realized it was a phenomenon, I set myself to learning as much as I could about it because I loved it. So, I mean, a lot of the museums that we know and love have really good collections. Like the Philadelphia Museum has a great collection of lover's eyes.
Really?
Yeah, it's in their miniature room, and I just, salivate. And then the Met has some obviously wonderful examples. The Victoria and Albert Museum has. And then the largest private collection from David and Nan Skier was just recently, or quasi-recently, exhibited as part of a traveling exhibition that I traveled to Delaware to see at the Winterthur Museum, and they have about 100 examples of them. They've been collecting them for a while, and so it's called The Look of Love. They have a beautiful catalog if people want to seek that out. As soon as I knew this was a thing, I immediately made one for myself, right? I wear it all the time. And I made one of my sweetie, my husband. And yeah, I just love it.
So it's a necklace that...
Yeah, the lover's eyes are typically watercolor on vellum, and then they set it under glass or on ivory, actually, on PC. But like back in the day, they were painting it on ivory. They would set it under glass and usually surround it with semi-precious stones, and they would be exchanged as tokens of love, of devotion. And because it was anonymous and you really could not tell who this person was, people wore them openly as jewelry, as brooches, rings, open lockets like the one I'm wearing. And mine has like a little bit of hair in the back. That's also a very Victorian touch. They put hair work in the back. And I immediately made myself one and just... Yeah, my husband was looking at me like, yeah, you're coming for my hair. And I was coming for his hair. And it's super weird and creeps people out. And I don't care. But yeah. And then there are a bunch of artists who I know are doing stuff inspired by that. So I know I'm not the only one. Fatima Ronquillo does really gorgeous oil paintings inspired by these brooches, and she'll have them kind of included in her works. Tabitha Vevers did a whole series of just the eyes of famous paintings. So you might be able to test your knowledge of which
Wow.
Yeah, just wonderfully cool stuff. But I'm really enamored with that whole phenomenon, and I just leaning into its idiosyncratic weirdness. just going hard on that.
Just going all in. I love it. Yeah. How many of these have you done?
I've done 16 so far, and I am looking to have another 4 done for a show, for a solo show of them.
What reaction, if any, have you had so far to them?
I mean, the wonderful thing is that most of the people in my life look at it, they're uniformly positive. I had started kind of pejoratively, jokingly calling them my sad eye doilies, just like feeling out how weird of an idea I had and just being like, yeah, guys, I think I might make these sad eye doilies, and just describing what that would look like and just waiting to see if they were like, Diana, that's literally insane. But the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. And I am sharing some really dark stuff on these, right? Because it's whatever my subject is comfortable sharing, whatever she's comfortable sharing or they are comfortable sharing, that's what I'm doing. I'm amazed people aren't more horrified by what I'm making. I am just stubbornly making them anyway.
Well, I think that it's such a difficult experience, clearly, like that's the understatement, and it's a difficult subject to tackle, but there's so much shame involved in it, and then there's also, anyway, that's a whole other conversation, but it's so sad and frustrating that women are made to feel it's a horrific enough experience, and then to have, like, I'm just thinking of what happens when people do go to testify and what they're put through. That to me is just like another violation. But I think also that they want to tell the story because they don't want it to happen to somebody else. And at the same time, it is making themselves extraordinarily vulnerable because you don't know if your story is going to be received with empathy or with ridicule or with, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? Or you must have been asking for it,
Why didn't you? Yeah, that's such a great point. Yeah, I feel really privileged with the level of trust that these folks have placed in me. And I am sensible of that. And so even though there's more and more women coming out publicly, and there is for the first time in my lifetime, or maybe anyone's, really people being held accountable for actions harming women in a way that I've just never seen before. Even though that's the case now, I still just did not want to put my subjects through that. And I was actually waiting for a lot more blowback on sharing these things than I have received so far, knock wood. But it might just be that less people have seen these things than have, their email ready to roll. But I wanted to make sure that even in the wording, because we kind of workshop the wording of their experience together, that identifying details were left out. And I mean, I was really careful. I did design the kind of cut paper part with each woman's personality in mind. But I mean, unless you know them, you're really not going to know who these people are. So I feel good. I feel like there's a firewall of art between my women's circle and the outer world. Yeah.
What are you most proud of in your work or in your growth as an artist?
I feel like this series is a huge departure for me. It's the first time I feel like I'm really firing on all cylinders. And it's the first time that I feel like I've done a body of work that I'm deeply proud of. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, not only is it something, kind of combining my love of the decorative, because they are like little doilies, and it's fiercely feminist in its message. And it is including the portraiture element that I love and the technical ability that is needed to create realistic eye portraits. It's also including, my love of these weird objects, these weird lovers' eyes, and they just sit well as a collection. And I mean, I spent most of 2017 just in my studio painting, and I feel like the election of 2016 just like knocked me to my knees, and I questioned everything all of a sudden about it, literally everything. And all of a sudden my work, while I stand behind it, seemed just not enough. So I started making like these weird little things. Like I did paintings on my ballot stubs from that election. I had saved them because I thought we'd historically elect our first female president. And, kind of with these portraits of me and my friends holding up really aggressive signs about the incoming administration. And I was like, this is garbage. I don't like what's happening here. And I don't want to make pretty things. It's not enough for me right now in this moment to make something beautiful. And I love making beautiful things, but I can't just do beautiful. And so I guess in terms of what I'm most proud of,
I'm sorry.
Doing this, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just what you just said is exactly, I think, some of the issues with how women are perceived. Just like, I can't just do beautiful. I have to like express myself, and I have a voice and I have an opinion, and I'm speaking up.
Yeah, I just feel like this was the first time. And so I am very proud of this series. And I do feel like probably it is my greatest technical accomplishment to date, where I love other pieces I've made. I'm not saying, but this feels like I am being very authentic. I'm fully just nestling into an authentic voice that, right after graduate school, I'm still kind of hunting for that, still trying to find that. I'm really circling something authentic and really pussyfooting around with a little bit more symbolism here, a little bit this there, and here I'm just kind of saying, this is me. And I'm cool with it being super weird and being sad-eyed doilies. So I would say I'm very proud of this series. I hope people look at it and are not saddened, but yeah.
Empowered.
Yes, perhaps empowered, or maybe they feel seen, maybe they feel understood, or maybe they feel like sometimes beauty can exist even when there's horror in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. It sounds to me like you had the same reaction that I think a lot of people had to the election and the incoming administration, the current administration. And I know from talking to a lot of artists that there's a lot of that feeling of just first, what just happened? How did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And then equal parts, I think, feeling really helpless, and equal parts like, I want to do something, I just don't know what to do.
Yeah, of like where should my practice go from here? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I had conversations with a lot of artists in the immediate months after that were just like, what do we do? Like, how do we handle this? And that feeling of, I don't just want to make the same stuff.
Yeah.
I have to respond and react to this. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. No, I did a series of interviews for Artists on Art magazine afterwards about politics expressly. And so I interviewed some artists like Alice Beasley, and she had done a bunch of quilting pieces, and I interviewed another cut paper artist and just kind of asking them the same questions, like, how did this change how you look at things? And I kept asking people. And then I interviewed two of my friends, E.R. DeGray and Cara DeAngelis, because they both already were working on political stuff. And just asking, like, guys, what do we do? What do we do from here? And so my friend, so Cara's like busily painting Donald Trump with roadkill on his head. And I, God bless. It was a beautiful / horrifying portrait. So like you beautifully crafted, but really just god awful. And ER is doing all of these, things about the opioid crisis. And, so I was really trying to center myself around my crew and around artists who I respected and looking to see what other kind of art activism is happening. I don't know if you know Alexandra Bell's counter narrative series. She's doing reinventing the New York Times layout. So she is redacting, she is shuffling the layout around, she is making edits, she redoing it to take away a lot of the racial bias that neutral, quote unquote neutral establishment is giving us, like how we are receiving these bias. And it's so insidious. It's so under the radar. Tatiana Fazla Lizadeh is doing a Stop Telling Women to Smile. And she's also wheat pasting her work around. I am obsessed with that. Talk about figurative work coupled with text. So she'll have like her drawing of a woman, and the woman will be making eye contact with you. This is wheat pasted on the streets of New York, right? And actually internationally, I think. And they're saying things like, I'm not here for you. And that's like huge block text underneath her drawing of this woman. And I am just like, yes, 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 yes. All of these women doing these things, really leaning into pretty isn't enough anymore. It ain't going to cut it for right now. I mean, I get you got to sell your still lives, or like you got to sell your landscapes. Like artists got to make a living. So I'm not here to diss that. But I mean, for those of us who are sitting here just losing our minds, how is our art going to reflect that? And I feel like my immediate friends and my crew, my art crew, are just slaying, right? And then I also feel like the people that I'm keeping an eye on, they know it's time to step up, and they're doing that. And I am hugely inspired by their work.
Mm-hmm. This is an interesting question. How would you like these pieces to be seen?
I just want eyeballs on them. I know that's no pun intended, but like, I just want people to see them. I think that's what most artists want. I would probably want them to be seen as a collective and not a part. I have a few standalone favorites actually, but I just want them seen. I think I realized when I was making them that they're not really sellable things per se, because a lot of them have these traumatic narratives or just depressing or whatever. So probably a space, like maybe a museum. In an ideal world, it would be camped out somewhere in a museum. I remember at the RISD Museum, I encountered Peregrine Honig's Ovubet series, and it was this like alphabet series on doilies, and I think that stuck with me. I saw it again at the National Museum for Women in the Arts in DC and lost my mind because I was so excited to see it there. But she did almost like Edward Gorey's Gashly Crumb Tinies, you're nodding. Yeah. So you know how it's like children meeting their untimely demise because like they're eaten by bears or like stifled under rug, right? And it's kind of like hilarious, but also macabre. So her series isn't what begets the violence of just children. It's specifically violence against girls. So it's kind of like, and it's not bound into a book either. It's just these standalone prints on these doilies where it's, talking about these girls, these 26 girls and what has happened to them. And even back in the day at RISD, I looked at that and was like, this is something. And I think the spaces that I've seen her work at makes a lot of sense as to why her work is there. You know what I mean? Like it's in a museum because ain't no one wants to buy these sad doilies about molested girls. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Right.
I'm like, maybe it needs to be somewhere where no one will buy them because no one will buy them. So yeah, that's my thought.
That reminds me of, I saw Kara Walker. I saw her exhibition at the Arm& Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. And I didn't know, I'd heard of her work. If I remember it correctly, I was in that area meeting somebody else and I was early. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to go to the Arm& Hammer, see what's there. And there's the Kara Walker exhibit. And so, I'm walking through and it starts off, kind of innocently enough. And then you start really seeing what's going on in these, these paper cutouts. And by the end of it, I had to just go, I just went to the bathroom and cried. Like, I just couldn't. It was so powerful, so simple, and so profound, and also you cannot deny it and you cannot look away from it. And so that's why I was asking that, like, not that you'd want to make people cry. I don't think that was Kara's intention.
Lighthearted human. And I'm like, let's make this really depressing series. I love laughing, and that's funny that I'm doing this, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's how we, laughter and humor is some of the way that we deal with the tough issues. But I'm kind of curious how you would want to see them presented, and then how you would want to see them, not really presented, but how you would want them to be received versus how you expect them to be received.
Again, I've been really happy with how people have been receiving them. So like artist friends of mine whose opinions I really deeply respect have said nothing but very positive things. And so I'm like, oh, maybe people won't hate these. But in terms of what I want from the reaction, like I would say just women, I want them to feel that, this is for you. You feel seen and feel heard and feel like what you go through, I know that it's not okay. Someone out there knows it's not okay. And it's not normal and it's not acceptable. And for men, this is not a series not for them. Use that. Look at that and see those moments and look back and reflect over your life and say, are there times that I just turned a blind eye to this, or at worst perpetrated some of these things? But look for the ways that you could do better. And I think that was what also the election taught a lot of us, is just, oh, okay, it's not what we thought and we all have to do better. And so, yeah, I've been busily trying to be better because I need to be better too. And so we all do. And that's what my hope would be, is that women feel seen in a way that's genuine, and that men see opportunity to empathize with another person and their experiences and reflect on how they can be part of a trending change, a cultural change where we no longer say as a society, it's cool to just not pay women as much. It's cool to just make women feel like, they are less valuable.
What do you think the role of, do I want to call it political art, politicized art that deals with, the hard issues, these things that are happening? What do you think the role of that is? This is one of those tough questions, like, what's the meaning of life? But what do you think?
Well, Patrice, where does it fit into this overall movement?
For the artist who's creating it, I think there is oftentimes just a need to express, it's like a release, but it's also to start a conversation. It's also to maybe try to show a point of view, either to convince somebody or to just say like, hey, look, here's another way to look at this.
Yeah. I think it's visibility matters. And so getting more of this kind of work, or just political work, like wheat pasting it around Manhattan sounds like a baller idea because you could just go and see it everywhere. But getting more work by women, by people of color in galleries, it doesn't have to be politicized, in my opinion, per se, although cool if you want to do that. It's more, there has to be a shift in our spaces where we have our art, because all of the voices are not being heard right now. I mean, we've been in art schools. I've been an educator, for a long time. I was a figure model for a long time. I was in and around art classes all my life, and I saw mostly women there. I was having this discussion with a friend the other day, and he seemed genuinely puzzled that the galleries didn't reflect that. And I'm like, oh no, check out what the gender balance is on most of the galleries, most of the museums, and ask yourself why there is overwhelming amounts of women in art schools taking those classes and getting those degrees, and barely any. And that goes actually for people of color as well, because my grad school was wonderful, but it was also not incredibly diverse. And then so a lot of my friends, I think they struggled with that while they were in such a predominantly white space. I feel like there's cultural shifts changing, and I want to see that reflected, not necessarily politically, but just having our voices. Having those voices heard and seen in these spaces makes a huge deal of difference. So to me, that it's less about politics and more about if you're getting all of the different viewpoints, because that's what they're doing, right? An artist is making something, and in doing so, we're saying, this is what I care about. So then I would get to see what you care about, and I want to see what you all care about. I don't want to just see the same old faces that I have been seeing in museums and all that. Like, I want to see the gallery world be more reflective of the world, I guess.
That we live in. Yeah. I think it matters incredibly to see somebody like you doing the thing that you want to do. That it's not always this single viewpoint. I think one of the most... Well, right now I'm thinking of the portrait of Michelle Obama and that little girl that stood in front of it. Did you see that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. When she followed me on Instagram, I lost my ever-loving mind. I told everyone in my world, and they were like, we don't really care as much as you do, but I did a little happy dance. I love her work. I can't wait to go to DC and see those portraits. I just can't. And it sparked a really great debate about portraiture, right? It made portraiture newly relevant to people who hadn't really considered portraiture before. So yeah, I love that it put figurative art right at the forefront, where people were all of a sudden having these really robust discussions about which portrait is what and what's here and there and why did this happen and what, they're discussing art, figurative art, portraiture, and it seemed to reinvigorate. Both Kehinde's and Amy's work seemed to reinvigorate that discussion in a way that I was deeply delighted by. I actually just included the pair of those portraits in a lecture for my students today at College of San Mateo. They were treated to my little love fest about them, but yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, yeah, I think the most important thing about all this work that's coming out that you just described is both the conversations that are happening and also the fact that people can look up and see this painting of someone by someone who looks like them.
Yeah. I just can't wait to see. I'm so pissed that I live on the West Coast when this came out. I was like, you know what? It would have been a really easy Amtrak ride, and now it's a plane ride. Yeah. She's hugely talented. I can't wait to see them in person. Mm-hmm. And also, yeah, it just matters. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I'm light-skinned, blue-eyed. It is, unless I make the decision to try to think, what would it be like, to have to really go search for and look for somebody, a role model that's yes, she did it, I can do it. Yeah. I think that's why the election was important to me. But yeah, I wanted to be able to look and see a woman. But I also, feel like, what does it mean to not be the default? And yeah, so we spoke just early in our conversation about how it's only recently that I realized is having a family that was supportive of me being an artist and not saying, what a financially unviable thing to do. Go be a doctor, for crying out loud. The fact that I think you're just coming into how much of that privilege you have. And so I'm sitting in that and being like, yeah, no, that was not nothing, that my family allowed me to do that, allowed me to be the person that I now am. And then everything else being a default setting white person in the world where I don't have to worry about how people are perceiving me or if the police will. It's appalling. And so just sitting with that and having those conversations with everyone is all of our job now as white ladies, for sure, because we have not been having a good rap lately. We have been calling the police at Starbucks is what we have been doing.
Oh, okay. I see what you meant. I'm like, what?
Yeah, no, we've been having a bad rap. We've been calling the police an awful lot for just, I don't know, no apparent reason. But yeah, so I don't know. I worked at a Starbucks. I was like, how dare you drag Starbucks into this, guys? We are all just a collection of individuals. We are all just trying to do the best we can. Not everyone going to call the police because you want to use the bathroom. I was like personally affronted by that. I was like, no, that's not how any of that went down. No.
Oh, yeah, there's so much of that.
We're in the weeds now.
We are in the weeds. Okay. It's ridiculous to say or think that artists aren't thinking about all this stuff that's happening and that it's not impacting their work. I know it is impacting our work, and it is fueling some of our work, like yours and all the artists that we've just talked about. So I don't feel bad for getting off on that topic. What are your daily habits? What do you do when you walk into the studio? The silly, goofy, whatever thing that you do, like all of it. What happens when you open the door of the studio and you walk in?
I'm probably squeezing out gouache or re-wetting it. You know what I mean? Just getting myself laid out. Probably putting on either like your podcast or like Harry Potter or something where I'm just like, I like voices in the studio, so I feel like I have a little friend in there. So yeah, I'll listen to way too many political podcasts. So I'm putting that on, and I got my little like flip flops on, and got the one north light window that we got going on in our home, and yeah, I'm just pulling up whatever reference image that I'm using. And I'm just starting and being right pleased with myself to be alone in the studio and feeling really lucky to be just in there. I don't get a lot of like dread or any of that existential stuff to make it, but I will get distracted. I'll like go make myself tea, and I try and resist the allure of checking my phone. Although sometimes I'll have conversations with friends. Since I moved out west, I'm trying to keep in touch with my circle, and a lot of my core folks are East Coast. So we'll do chat time, and I'm pretty good at just, it's like talking and driving. You can do the same. So I just, if I'm not in the planning stage of what I'm doing, which really does, I can't even really hardly do music. I really have to focus. But
you can talk?
Oh, yeah. I think all of my teachers were a little bit like, can you really? I'm just incredibly verbal all the time. So yeah, much to the chagrin of everyone who has ever instructed me, I'm really good at just talking and working and talking, and it's fine. So yeah, so if I'm not listening to something, then I'm talking to someone or something where I have a little background. I like learning while I'm painting, and I feel like I have the bandwidth for both. Again, if it's not in the planning stage, or if I'm doing a paper cut that's pretty cut and dry.
Okay, I can totally say. I was just thinking, like, depending on what I'm doing and what stage of the painting is, I can listen to books, I can listen to music. Sometimes, though, I can't listen to music with words, or if it is words, it has to be in a language that I don't understand.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, but I have a hard time talking and painting. I have to really focus on it. Like when I give demonstrations, I am so focused on use your words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Explain what you're doing.
It's a whole other skill. I will say, as a teacher, that was one of the things that I realized I just garnered as a skill, is that you're used to the different questions that folks ask you, because they all, a lot of student questions are going to be around the same things. And so I barely give them a chance to ask questions because I anticipate them, and I'm just talking and narrating and drawing. And it's only when I am really struggling with the perspective or something where I really have to focus, then it gets quiet. So I'm really thinking when I get quiet. But if I'm like moseying along and okay, and then this happens, and then you draw this, and this is how you measure, I'm narrating as I go really consistently. Like I didn't realize that that was the thing that I did, but I have apparently learned to just talk. I sing while I paint sometimes. I mean, I'm just a noisy human making these like quiet, stoic works. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Do you talk to yourself?
Oh yeah, I do, and I try and be kind. I think that's the big thing. I think there's a lot of, negative self-talk that can get stuck in there. And so usually if I'm having a day where it's, something's not going well or whatever, I just try and be like, you know what, you're doing the best you can. Ain't no one's going to just blame you for that. Just you keep trying your best. Just you keep doing that. I'll like pep talk my own self.
Oh my God. You know what? I think you should record like a pep talk for artists that they can just like put that on and listen to it while they're painting. I would love that.
Do you know it's actually a wonderful thing to listen to? Bob Ross put out or someone compiled a song digitizing Bob Ross, and it was "Every Day's a Good Day When You Paint." Your face says recognition. Do you know this?
No, I don't. It's more like a face of astonishment. I'm like, why do I not know of this? Where is it? And where can we get it?
I'm going to have to send you the link to that because it's like a really short song that I'll put on at irritating interval and I'll just loop it. But it's just saying things like, you know what? Every day's a good day when you paint, and it's, just you're in control. Just don't be. They must have auto-tuned his voice so that his voice is singing. I am just way too delighted with that thing, and I think that would be how my pep talk would sound. It would sound like Bob Ross singing at you, being like, just put a little happy little cloud in, guys. It's going to be okay.
Oh my God, I love it.
I love Bob. May he rest. May he rest.
If you can tell me this without any identifying features, you said that you anticipate a lot of your students' questions because you get, that's pretty common. What are some of the more unusual questions that artists have asked you when they're learning how to paint?
Sometimes I will get them and I will always kind of pause and be like, that's a new one. But they're usually so off the beaten track that I don't add them to the repertoire of things that I willingly share as I demonstrate. I wish I could have an answer more readily for you. But in terms of unusual things, I mean, it's a whole lot of the same things. So I just kind of just go and just say the same things. And whatever I hoped that someone would tell me is how I kind of teach. I'm like, what's something I would have liked to have known at that stage? I'll go ahead and say that. Sorry, nothing comes to mind of what would be unusual in terms of questioning.
What are the common questions you get then?
Why are you holding that way? Like the utensil, whatever I'm drawing, what is measuring? What does that mean? How are you doing that? What do you mean when you're looking at the angle of something? Things where maybe it's not specific questions, but it's definitely points of confusion. And so I try and say it several different whatever gets in, because some people are visual learners and then those are the people that benefit from demos. And some people really do like having that verbal confirmation of what they're doing. Measuring is a tricky one because they think it's like a method that's scientific. And I keep trying to say it's not.
It's relationships.
Yeah, it's what gets you in the ballpark, but it's not a method of science and never will be, at least not the way I do it. Maybe other artists have a different way.
What do you think art students are told that is either useless or the word dangerous keeps popping into my head, but it's too strong of a word. Either, that's just going to throw them off the wrong track.
I think anytime you're told this is the way to do it, you should be real suspicious about that. There's so many different ways to do everything. And if you're saying it's only this one way, then you're leaving out an awful lot. And there's so much creativity in the world and so many voices that are like, you or I just really that delight in helping people and wanting them to just help them get better. And, let's do this. I love being helpful, and so let's let in a bunch of those voices, or I especially dislike when, and I have to fight the urge to do this myself, but in independent projects, when a teacher says, this is what you should do, just question that. don't just accept because that they said, you know what you should do this, right? If I look at something, a piece of student work, and I think, it would be great if they did this thing, I have to bite my tongue because it is not my business. Like my business there, at least how I see it, and the classes I teach, is to help them get the tools to make what they want, not to tell them what they should make. So anytime someone says this is the right way, anytime someone says you should do this exact project, just side eye that and really see if it passes the smell test for you, because it might not.
I love that. Great advice.
Yeah, I got lots of gems. Oh my goodness.
That's fantastic. I love it. It's not that I see that a lot. It's just that I hear like some of my students say things like, oh, well, I stopped doing this thing that I love because this one person, one artist, one professor, told me this thing or said that that's not valid or something like that. And, if I could wave my magic wand and just over some artists, it would just be that, I think that some instructors are just completely biased and they're pushing a particular agenda. And then some other ones, maybe they didn't explain themselves well. Maybe they didn't intend it to be as strong as it did. Maybe that's something that the student was really sensitive about. So it completely stuck. And to the instructor, it was an offhanded remark. So question everything. I mean,
yeah. To what you were saying, I remember my critiques in graduate school, and they're exhausted. All of these instructors, they're putting in a long day of a lot of talking. And I think you're right. You hit on that when you said, there are some throwaway remarks in there. And so to that end, I try and remind myself with as much consistency as I possibly can as an instructor that even though I'll say little silly asides about, my whatever little story I'm telling that day, but when I'm coming for critique about your work, everything I say matters enormously to that person for that moment, and that they might retain it for a really long time. And so I have to be careful with that. And I try to remind myself often that they're going to retain that more than I will, because it's said about their work. Of course they will. Of course I do when it's about my own work and someone's giving me a critique. So I also try, if I've had a critique and they were really unkind, and that's happened, of course, I try and just, I react kind of all, how dare you? But then I sit with it and I sift through it and I say, is there any truth to this? Does anything resonate at my core? And if it really doesn't resonate, I can say, you know what? I'm just going to discard what you said. I mean, I'll remember it, but it will not influence me. And we all have to have a thick skin. So yeah, if you're going to just turn around and drop your paintbrush at the first time someone says, I don't like that, then listen, you just get good at bending over, picking that thing up again. I don't know. You have to keep going. I don't know.
Oh my God, I love your attitude. Well, then you're just going to get really good at bending over and picking that thing up again because you're not quitting.
I know. I'm don't quit. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think most artists they learn to have a thick skin. I think that we all have our soft spots. We all have our Achilles heel. And if we can be aware of that and know that that's there, then we can be Diana just touched my Achilles heel. It better, not put so much emphasis on that or ask her about it or get more information, get more validation. I remember a mentor that I had one time said something to me that I think what he said was, I hope you don't regress and go back to what you were doing before. And then of course I did. And then the funny thing was that stuck in my head. So I was kind of afraid to even though I adored him, I was kind of afraid to go back and show him what I was doing. Cause I was like, I've regressed and he's not going to like this. And finally I was just I can't let that fear effectively destroy this relationship, because the way that I was reacting to it was in some sense hiding from him. And so I basically, I just laid it out. I said, hey, I want to see you, but I have to tell you, I'm scared because I don't know if you remembered this, but you said X, Y, and Z, and then you said, don't do X, Y, and Z. And now all I'm doing is X, Y, and Z. I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed in me. I'm afraid that you're not going to like what I'm doing. La, 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 la. And the response obviously was, I'm never going to be disappointed in you as long as you keep following your heart and you keep painting, because that's what the instructors, like, that's what we all want, right? When we're sharing this with other people, you don't want to crush their soul. Like,
no,
like
and I think that's wonderful that you were self-aware and vulnerable enough to say, I do want to see you, but here's what's up. Here's what's in my brain right now. And I bet it makes you more empathetic for your students because you want to be the place that they feel okay coming to you for your thoughts, no matter what. So if you're one of those cut and dry, like, oh, it's then they're not going to feel comfortable coming to you. And it probably means that you're more open as a person to receiving what they're making if you know that you are a safe repository for that progress and that you are just going to be a beacon of encouragement, not like a damper.
Yeah. And I think, also like, to your point earlier that it was my responsibility to do that, like he had no clue that was going on, that's why I hadn't come by, that's why I wasn't going to see him. And so, that was my responsibility to sort of own that and go, you know what, if this is important to me, I'm going to do this thing as uncomfortable as it makes me, as vulnerable as I feel, because then you always have those fears of like, what if I'm right? What if he does say that? No,
I think that's quite brave of you. I hear you. And that's great that you take ownership. But yeah, I think that still takes some self-awareness and bravery to put it out like that.
It wasn't easy.
I built up to the courage, but we got there. No, I think that's
totally. It wasn't like I woke up this one morning. I was like, okay, la, la, la. I think it took me like 6 months. It took me a long time.
No, I still snaps for that.
Awesome. I've never asked somebody this question, but I feel like I should ask you this. What have I not asked you that I should? What do you want people to know? What did I miss?
I feel like all of the things that I like knowing from your guests is the road that they took. And I like knowing that there is no one way. And so what I usually want to know from listening is a sense of that we all are doing this weird journey separately, but we'll arrive somewhere, So I feel like what I would want people to know is just that my story has a lot of bumps in it, a lot of bumps and hiccups. And my thoughts on being an artist and trying to make work and not knowing how it will be received, not knowing where the journey goes from here is just to keep myself centered and just have my work be okay for me. I feel like I want people to know that that's one of the things that I would want for other people too, is that you're not looking at how you look on paper to validate you, but you're looking at how you feel. Like, what's your interior litmus test for yourself? And how do you feel like you're doing on this journey? And that's I stopped looking for approval from other people because I'm like, oh, you're just not gonna get it all the time. Like you can't put your self-worth in that basket. And so just be your authentic selves and, know that all of us out here and me, we're all just trying to get to where we need to be going, and it's going to all be bumpy for all of us. I don't know. I find that very comforting when I listen to things. So I want to echo that in how many guests of yours have said some version of that over these many pods. That's probably not what you meant with that question. So
I love that answer. I think it's great. I really do like it. And probably because I have a soft spot for like lifting people up and empowering them and not allowing them or encouraging them. I guess it's not allowing them. It's encouraging them to basically not take shit from anybody.
I know. I've gotten real good at like pulling the mute button out on a lot of voices. There's not a lot of voices in here. It's nice. I let very few people in here, and I very rarely have other voices in there. And so I know that if my voice is saying, you could be doing better, I got to step it up. And if my voice is like, no, you're really trying and that's where you're at, you should feel good about what you've done, just relying more on just my voice to blot out the other voices. Because you get a lot of instruction, there's a lot of voices in there. So I turn those down and just try and have an internal compass and strengthen that. I don't know.
Diana, you're a delight. This is so much fun.
Thank you. I had a good deal of fun. I know. I feel like we got real dark, and I'm glad we ended a little more lighthearted.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Savvy Painter podcast with the artist Diana Corvelle. Go to savvypainter.com and click on the podcast link. You'll find show notes there with all sorts of goodies for you. You'll find examples of Diana's portraits, get links to the artists that she mentioned, and also links to connect with Diana Corvelle. The Savvy Painter podcast is made possible by listener donations. I've been working hard to bring you tips and techniques to help you out in your studio, in-depth interviews with artists who are gracious enough to share their stories, and by sharing their stories, they show the rest of us that we are not alone. Big or small, your contribution matters. So I would like to give a huge thank you and much gratitude to some very special people today. So a big thank you goes out to Christine Gade, Dennis Dooley, Diana Twining, Gabe Langholz, James Richards, John Sherman, Kathleen Bousselet, Kira Elliott, Konstantinos Poupakis, Laura Fletcher, Lauren Everett Finn, Marie Clark, Marie Frudenberger, M. Lehman, Rebecca Holst, Richard Dorbin, Robert Mills, Ruth McCorson, Sandra Burchell, Sarah Baptist, Sarah Sedgwick, Suzanne Farrell, and William Fulmer. Thank you so much. You keep this podcast going and help other artists make an impact. Big or small, your contribution matters, and I really appreciate it. So until the next time, this is Ann Treese Wood with the Savvy Painter podcast. Thank you so much for listening.